A trust is a means to manage your assets during your life and be able to have an ultimate control of the disposition upon your passing.
I want to give a quick shout out to my podcast manager, Abby. If you're in need of help in launching and managing your own show, please reach out to her at productions@abbygwaki.com. I'll put her details in the show notes. She really is the best, and I love her. Hello, welcome back to Quiet Wealth. I'm your host, Camilla, and I am excited because we have a special guest today. Today's episode 101. And we'll be talking with Jennifer McNeil-Lozano about all things trusts and estates and all of that planning. Because remember, when we talk about wealth building, part of wealth building, of course, is investing and getting the assets. But then the other part that needs to go hand in hand with that is wealth protection. So I'm super excited I'll be talking to her. But first, if you are new here to Quiet Wealth, welcome. I'm so excited that you've joined me today. Here at Quiet Wealth, we talk about three things. We talk about investing, leveling up, getting in the game, and getting alternative investments in your portfolio. The second thing we talk about is business building. So why you need a business and how to have a business in order to save on taxes. Again, keeping more of your wealth that you've built. And the third is impact, leaving a legacy. So how do you do that? And how do you do it in a way that doesn't only happen after you die? Maybe it happens while you're still alive. We talk about all of those things. So we're so excited to welcome Jennifer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you on to talk about this stuff. And I know this can be a complicated or a overwhelming topic for a lot of people, but it's such an important part of wealth building that you've got to have the protection and you've got to know how to lay all the things out. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you. But first, tell us about your journey. How did you get to doing what you do now?
Okay. Being born and raised in LA, I think it's somewhat natural. I ended up in the entertainment business and I worked for Sony Music and 20th Century Fox. And while I was working at 20th Century Fox, I went to law school in the evening and always thought I would be in-house in a large studio or some sort of entertainment company. And the birth of my first child changed that trajectory. And I started my own firm. And with becoming a new mom, surrounded a lot of new families that were trying to plan for an emergency. What would happen with your children if you were in a car accident or if you should pass away? I started looking into estate planning and doing that for one family. And it kind of grew from there. And now I have my own practice completely because for a little while I was doing entertainment and estate planning. Now I'm all trust and estates, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. We're just starting to scale and grow now. Initially, it was just me. Now I have support, and even my husband's on board. I have another attorney who I've known since middle school, which makes it very much like a lovely family environment, and paralegal, another of counsel coming on board. So it's organically grown.
Take me back to you had your first child.
Yes.
And you realize, oh, maybe working in the entertainment industry is not going to work out for the way I want to raise my child. Why did you think starting your own practice would be better? That seems like it's a lot of work too, right?
Yes, it was a little daunting, but I knew that I'd have the most flexibility. It would be a lot of hard work, but I'm doing it for me and my family. And that was really what it was about, having that flexibility to be there at the time, he was like 4 months old. And I couldn't imagine working to have someone else take care of my child for me. So yes, it's a lot of work, but it's very fulfilling because yes, I can be there for drop-offs. I can be there to pick up. I can volunteer at their school. A lot of things that I would not have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, I think flexibility is so key. And I'm actually grateful to COVID in a way that kind of jolted corporations out of this inflexible work arrangement. Some corporations went right back to their inflexibility, but others have adapted and have realized, oh, we can keep the lights on, can keep business moving forward when people work remote or have flexible schedules or things like that. So I'm really glad for that. But You're right. The ultimate flexibility is being your own boss and having your own business. That's one of the reasons I quit my corporate job because I was seeking that flexibility of time. The time freedom is the most important thing to me right now is time freedom as I'm in a phase where half my kids have left and the other half are still here and I don't have very many years left with them and I'm like, "Oh, I need to be there for every single thing. I'm not going to miss a game. I'm not going to miss anything because it's important to me to have that time flexibility and freedom."
I've definitely at times kind of explored saying, oh, do I want this or do I want that? And it always comes back to I'm on the right path.
All right. So let's dive in and let's help the listener understand estates and trust. First of all, what's the difference between an estate and a trust?
Okay. If you don't have a trust, you definitely have an estate. An estate is basically everything, all of the assets that when you should pass away is part of you and would be calculated as one of your assets. If you kind of think about there's a federal estate tax exemption currently. That's at roughly 12.9 million per person. So when you pass away, you can transfer 12.9 without any tax consequence on a federal level. In California, we don't have an estate tax. Different states do. So that's something to keep in mind and consider. But anything that's in your estate when you pass away, that's what you're using that threshold for. So if something is actually in a trust, and there's many different kinds of trusts, there's revocable and irrevocable trusts. The difference is a revocable trust, you still control 100% during your lifetime. When you think about a tax identification number, it's your social security number. An irrevocable trust, on the other hand, you don't have the same access to those assets, whether you've gifted it to someone else or you have an annuity coming from that and the remainder goes to someone else. Or if you set it up for the benefit of your spouse, for example, and that you can indirectly receive some revenue from that trust, but you have no direct access. And so therefore it has its own tax identification number. And anything that's in an irrevocable trust is no longer part of your estate. Anything that's in a revocable trust is part of your estate. You are your own estate, and I guess your trust is a separate vehicle.
What is a trust used for?
A trust is a means to manage your assets. Well, when we speak of revocable trust, it's a means to manage your assets during your life and be able to have an ultimate control of the disposition upon your passing. One of the beauties also of a revocable trust is that you're able to plan for incapacity in your trust, which you're unable to do in a will, for example. A lot of times people don't understand the difference between a will and a trust. There are a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences at the same time.
Well, let's dive into those will versus the trust. When I was young, had my babies, then of course the conversation was always about, well, if me and my husband die, who's going to take the kids? And we need to have a will that says who's going to take the kids. And that was the most important thing back then. Now we're in a different phase of life. And it's no longer about who's going to raise the children. It's about who's going to get our assets or, how are they going to be split out and done. So is a will sufficient for this new stage of life when you're in your 40s and 50s? Or is now the time to get the trust? Like, when's the best time, I guess, is my question, to get a trust rather than just having a will?
Well, it depends on your asset profile. I definitely recommend a trust to anyone who has minors or also has real property. And I will explain why. As you said, in a will, you do nominate who would be your guardians. But also, if you have minors, you can never have a direct outright distribution to a minor in terms of if you put them down as a beneficiary on your bank account, for example, or your investment account. You'd have to petition the court for a guardian of the estate in order to manage that asset. But by the time they're 18, they'd get full outright distribution. And a lot of people don't potentially want that. So when you actually create a trust, you're able to say how the disposition would be. And maybe you want to give it to them at certain ages or stages of life, or you want to have it in a lifetime trust because you want to protect it from potential creditors or an ex-spouse down the road. And so you're creating a little bit of asset protection where they're able to ensure that that's going to be separate property. In a will, as you said, it's really important because the nomination of guardianship. But if you don't have real property and maybe you're in your 40s and 50s, you're already done with the minor stage of life with your children. I have some clients who just prefer to just have a will and they can just leave on all of their accounts, who they would like that account to be transferred to. So that's your beneficiary designation form. And so if you actually say your spouse, and then you can list your contingent and you can list a number of different beneficiaries, those beneficiary designations pass by operation of law, and that passes regardless of what your will says. So your will would just kind of carry over everything else. In California, if you have our threshold for opening a probate is 184,500. So if you have anything over that amount, you'd have to lodge your will with the court and probate it exactly how you said you would like the disposition of your assets to flow. But if it's anything under that amount, there are means to sign an affidavit with a certain bank account, for example, and have it transferred if you forgot to put the beneficiary designation. So sometimes it makes sense not to go and get a full trust-based foundational plan. But the majority of my clients, I would say, do have trust-based plans.
Will you define probate?
Okay, probate is a court process where you either have a will or you don't have a will, and you put it before the judge, and someone would petition to be your personal representative. It's a process by which the court supervises the disposition of your assets and ensures that everything goes according to the probate code or your wishes as laid out in your will. Sometimes you could be petitioning under the probate court for contest, even in your trust. That would still be before the probate court and the probate judge. In California, it's a long process, generally at least a year to 18 months, as long as it's not contested. I've had some probate matters, they're going on 3+ years right now.
Let's talk a little bit more about probate. Is probate a bad thing or is it a good thing for you and your assets?
Okay, well, in California, we have statutory fee structure. So basically, any fees that go to an attorney, as well as whoever is nominated and set by the judge as your administrator, they get paid the same. And roughly with all the costs associated with petitions and inventory and appraisals and everything else that's associated with the probate, it can be up to about 1% of the gross value of your estate. So we're not talking about net. A lot of people say that, but you have a $1.5 million home and you have a $1 million mortgage. So really I have 500,000 equity. Well, it doesn't matter when it comes to these statutory fees. It goes on the gross value. So it can really tap into the value that's ultimately passed to your beneficiaries. But sometimes if someone doesn't have a lot of trusted people around them, it might be good to actually have your whole process go through the probate court to ensure that there's an extra set of eyes making sure that everything's handled appropriately. However, the majority of people prefer to have a trust because everything in the probate court, it's all public record. So you start getting people going through the public records, contacting your family members, wanting to know if you want to sell the house, or, they start getting a lot of mail. And if you want to keep everything private, one way to do that is by having a trust.
And so by having a trust, does that avoid probate altogether?
Yes, who you nominate as your trustee is basically someone who would be your successor trustee stepping into your shoes if you were unable to serve in that capacity. It would be completely private unless, as I said before, someone contests and they have to petition the court for instructions or it ends up getting into litigation. But if you have a properly drafted trust, you can avoid a lot of that. You just have to really, that's why I get really scared when I see some of these LegalZoom or legal mills that are offering really low rate trust. And I'm like, you're not maybe addressing everything and you're opening yourself up to litigation.
If we take a timeout right now, like advice to the listener, please hire an expert. This is not something you want to skimp on. I know it costs money, but it's money well spent.
Yeah. And that ultimate litigation comes out of the trust as well. So that just further dilutes the money that ultimately goes to your intended beneficiaries.
Well, talk to me about contesting. So this is one of my fears, right? So I have 5 children and I don't want them to fight when I pass, when my husband and I pass. I would like everything to be harmonious. So tell me about what happens with contesting and why would that happen, I guess.
Sometimes I see that it happens because of actually things that happen during life. Maybe there's a parent that happened to favor one child over another with gifts during life. And once it's completely split, it wasn't favored as much, wants to fight to make things even, or even with the grandchildren and that sort of thing. So if there's any inkling that there's potentially going to be some sort of contest, it's always good to get an independent review where someone can actually review everything, get their intent, and it further bolsters the settler or trustor's intent on what they put in that trust and would maybe avoid any contest. There's also certain language you can incorporate. If you knew that there was going to be someone that was going to contest, you would draft accordingly. I mean, it's definitely subjective. So, I mean, you don't have that in your
Okay.
family.
Hope not. Let's hope.
Not to get
We can
personal.
fight every once in a while, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that someone wants to give something to someone else. If there's definitely going to be unequal distributions, then I like to actually explain that. Or even if someone is potentially going to be disinherited, sometimes it's best to gift them something so that there's something to lose, because the contest language often says if you contest, you're going to lose what you were potentially going to be given. So if they have nothing to lose, they have nothing to lose because they weren't given anything. But a lot of times also in those certain circumstances, I do have my clients draft a letter to their son or daughter, often explaining, or if it's because they are already set up and this other child needs more and they're really wealthy. I mean, there's a little bit of common sense in how you can draft.
Those are interesting decisions because, I just think about my children and as they start to grow, like there'll be some that will probably do well financially and some that might not, or maybe they all will, right? But at what point in time do you determine, well, I think, my second child needs more than my fourth is going to need? Or is this something that you're just every year you update?
Yeah, every year updating would get I definitely don't recommend that. It would get expensive.
Recommend that? Okay,
No, I mean,
got it.
I do say that, you should check back, because a lot of things that you draft, I always say draft for now, because a lot of decisions are hard sometimes. Draft for now, draft for today. We can always go back and amend at a later time. And also tax laws change. And so you have to consider that as well. If someone comes to me with a 10-year-old, 15-year-old trust, I think it's time for a restatement, even if you're not completely amending everything, because that how they have the ultimate distribution, even to their spouse, could not be beneficial for the current tax situation.
Do you bring in a tax expert or are you the tax expert when you're helping them with those decisions?
Now, if it gets really complicated in terms of a lot of advanced techniques, I would bring in another tax attorney. I'm not a tax attorney. I do trust and estates. I don't analyze that, but I do work oftentimes alongside with someone's CPA. I try to work with as many of their advisors that they have. So when it comes to like their wealth managers, CPA, as well as corporate attorneys. So when there's a lot of entities and a lot of business ventures, you just want to make sure that everything is properly looked at in a comprehensive level, because everything kind of works together. I would defer to their CPA.
Well, I know everybody kind of all works together to just get the holistic view going on because you can't make decisions in a vacuum because this decision affects what happens over here and just all sorts of things can happen. So our listener is typically a woman in her 40s and 50s on this verge of transitioning where life's now going to become more about them than it is about their kids because kids are going off and doing their own thing. What would you suggest to her? So maybe she just has a will that she's had, but nothing else. Where does she need to start to get going on this?
I would definitely first review asset profile. So I tell that woman to kind of gather all your assets, get your asset profile in order to ensure that the will would be the most appropriate vehicle to get her wishes documented. Similarly, when gathering all those assets, it's really imperative to review all the beneficiary designations and get confirmation on that to ensure that it's exactly as when we start getting into that kind of conversation of why have you come? Are there changes to this will that you potentially need? Once we look at the whole asset profile, we can determine if this is actually going to be the best vehicle or no. Maybe we need to get a trust in place. Also talk about their ultimate goal. So now that you're saying, maybe they're in the 50s, the kids are out of the house, what is their goal? Are they still working? Do they have a lot of business interests? I mean, really, as I said, even talking to the corporate attorney. So if they had businesses and they're really like focused on their businesses, talking to the corporate attorney, sometimes once the kids are out of the house, you set up this will when the kids were young, and now they've started a business and they haven't even really incorporated the two. They're like these two silos working together, and you kind of have to kind of bring them all together. And oftentimes, a trust would work out really well. You can assign all these interests to the trust if you have all these business interests, or if you have a lot of real property and you have all these different LLC interests. I mean, I think the first step is really gathering all that asset information together and examining it along with what their wishes are.
Well, and that's one of the things that I teach is you got to get organized first, right? So when I think about putting together like a full financial plan, and my partner is a certified financial planner, and so she and I work together on this, but step one is vision, right? What's your goal? What do you want to do? What do you want to achieve with the rest of your life? Because you have a long life to live still, and it's going to be exciting and you could do so many things. And then step two is to get organized, right? And so you've got to figure out all of your personal financial statement. What is that? And where are all of your assets? So basically, you're just going to list all of the real estate you own, the businesses that you own, the stocks that you have, and retirement accounts, everything. You need to have this full picture of where everything is and how much is in there and how is it growing and all of this. And sometimes we lose sight of that because we're just busy, right? I mean, when you're a woman in your 40s and 50s, I feel like I'm going 100 miles an hour. I'm like, oh, wait, I got to schedule in time to like look at my assets. Okay. And sometimes it's just a lot. It can feel overwhelming and feel like a lot, which is one of the reasons I launched this podcast, because I wanted to help women to not feel like it's a lot, or to like get little bursts of education while they're driving, on a walk, or out exercising or something, while doing the dishes, so they can listen and learn on the go. That's what I think is so awesome about podcasts, is that you can listen and learn on the go. And that's my favorite way to learn.
Yeah.
Besides reading at night, I still love to read too. So trusts and estates, I think when you said updating, so are you thinking maybe every 5 years is a good time to readdress or relook at it? Or what's the right time frame?
I say 3 to 5 years. And what I often do for my clients is I create a summary of their nominated fiduciaries for every document I draft, as well as a summary of their trust, because oftentimes, just looking at your trust can be overwhelming. it's so thick. People will especially look at the nominated fiduciaries for all the different documents, jot down, cross someone off, put someone else in, scan that email, and I automatically know what needs to be done. And it's just an easy way, when you talk about being overwhelmed, it's like just an easy way to just kind of reflect and know, I know that needs to be changed. Of course, when it comes to the trust and when there's a lot of more complex changes that they want some counseling on, then we'll definitely conference call or meeting to have that conversation. But I try to make it as easy as possible. But also, keeping up with what's going on. I talked about this federal estate tax exemption. As many people know, it's sunsetting January 1st, 2026. So everyone's kind of keeping their finger on the pulse to determine what's going to happen. And right now they're saying, roughly 5 plus, with inflation, maybe 7 million per person, which is still, when you're married, that's 14 million. But there are some, especially in California, there's a lot of estates that are going to have some issues, whether it's needing to like gift now before that sunset, or they're going to have to start using some advanced planning techniques and maybe getting their insurance out of their estate. When we talk about the estate, see, you're still owning that. Anything you own is part of your estate. So maybe getting that out into an ILET, for example, just to reduce that, because anything over that exemption amount will be taxed at 40%.
And so you're saying that sunsetting in 2026, meaning that if you don't pass before 2026, then it's no longer applicable to you, or it will just change?
So it will sunset, meaning, it was a law that was passed that Trump had set up, and it was only for a certain period of time unless Congress acts. And with everything going on in the world, and just inaction anyway, people are not confident that they will act. But we also have a potential new administration coming in next year. So, I mean, no one has that crystal ball.
But we shall see.
Yes, we shall see what we shall see when we shall see it. Yes.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Well, I want to talk to you about gifting in a minute, but another question about another issue that us women are having in this age stage of life is we're kind of sandwiched in between our parents aging and our children, right? When we think about our parents, what are the types of conversations that we need to be having with our aging parents now in terms of wills and trusts and all of that? Like, what would you suggest?
Well, this is definitely a tough one because there are some parents who don't want to go there because of
Mhm.
probably mortality reasons, but there's others that are really big on wanting to leave that legacy and want to have the conversation and get everyone in a room. And I mean that's the ideal situation, right? Everyone communicating, but simply asking, because of the fact that at a certain point that anyone gets dementia or they're, beyond that point where you're deemed incapable of signing a contract in capacity, it's too late. So you got to have that conversation now. Like, do you have anyone appointed? You can even talk about it in a way like in case of a car accident, it's a little less doom and gloom. But in case of a car accident, do you have your emergency documents in place? Who's nominated, just so I know. And just by even having that conversation of the emergency documents, it can kind of then lead to you talking about like their will and the trust or ensuring that their beneficiary designations are up to date. It can get really stressful for everyone and when it's left for when it's too late.
And it's a time to get the siblings together and just make sure everybody is on the same page and understands what's happening. Because for me, I'm one of 10 children.
Wow.
And for us, it's good for us to know kind of what mom and dad are thinking, where their thoughts are in terms of who gets what, or how they're going to split, or how much they're leaving to charity rather than children, and what's happening there. It's very helpful to understand. And I don't know all the details yet, but I think it's just more helpful to know rather than waiting till they pass and then finding out.
Circling back to your question regarding about contest, with such a large family, and there's probably more of a likelihood that something like that could happen, then it kind of bolsters that conversation with your parents of like, we want to make sure that we can still say a united front, that the family,
Yeah.
this doesn't break apart the family because you all are going to be mourning. And let's talk about it now because we love each other and go that angle because that is of course very important
Mhm.
most of the time.
That's great advice. Okay, let's talk about gifting for a minute. And I just recorded episode 100 where I talk about how to give $1 million in your lifetime. And that sounds like pretty awesome goal. Like that's one of my goals is to be able to give $1 million in my lifetime. Now you talked about there's ways to do that within the trust. What can you share with us about that?
Okay. Well, because we have this such a high exemption amount, there's some people that are kind of knowing that it's going to sunset, or if their estate is large enough and they're able to relinquish some of control of those assets, they are gifting up to that amount because it's kind of like a use it or lose it. So that's for the ultra high net worth individuals. Then you have people that are more modest. I mean, you can say 3 to 5 million, and they're like gifting up to the annual exclusion amount. So right now that's 17,000. So you can give 17,000 per person without having to worry about any potential tax consequence. Next year is actually going up to 18,000, but that's a way to actually give to your children, or you can even give to your grandchildren. I mean, it's unlimited. You can set up children's trust or grandchildren's trust and gift to that trust every year. Another way to gift and reduce your estate would be to, if you give to any university or school directly, you can't give it to your child to then pay their education. But if you give it directly to the university, for example, no tax consequence. Similarly, paying medical bills directly, no tax consequence. So you can get creative in terms of gifting for those reasons with no gift tax consequence.
That's cool. I like that a lot. So I'm always looking for strategies, how do we
Especially with 5 kids, and that's you and your husband. So you both can get
you both can give.
so theoretically 34,000 per child.
Interesting. And so your suggestion is to set it up in a trust for them. So each kid has their own trust. And that's where we funnel the money. Is in
How old are your children?
my youngest is 13, oldest is 21.
Well, yeah, because you wouldn't want to give, they're still young, even though they're out of the house. You said a couple of them are out of the house. Yes. Yeah. You wouldn't want them to necessarily just have that money. I mean, if you want just to create some sort of a vehicle for them to start investing. You can set it up in a certain way where you have an investment trustee. You can bifurcate some of the duties, but it's a bigger
Okay.
conversation.
Oh, another question I have about trustees. I've heard that sometimes people set up a lawyer as the trustee and sometimes they set up a family member. Do you have an opinion on one being better than the other?
I think it really depends on the beneficiaries. I think most people do like to keep it in the family, like especially when you set up a trust and the kids are young. I often have clients coming back or clients coming to me for a restatement and they're adding their adult children now as their successor trustees because they're good, responsible people. They're not kids. So I think it makes people feel comfortable when you have your family unit together like that. But obviously, it depends upon the family situation. I do have sometimes clients, they don't really have a lot of trusted people around them to be able to nominate. And so I have served a couple trusts where I will serve in that capacity, but I also give myself the power to appoint. So if it's something like if they were incapacitated and they were disabled, I'd be able to actually find them a proper non-corporate fiduciary who would be able to step into that role and, ultimately take care of them.
Okay, understood. Well, wow, this has been a lot of really great information. I know I have some things that I need to work on to finish up our, making sure our family is protected and taken care of and, all of that. And so I so appreciate you coming on. But so Jennifer, if someone wanted to get connected with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
You can email me at jennifer@mcneilllozanololaw.com or give my office a call and set up a consult, 424-276-7522. And yes, to any of your listeners, if they had any questions about anything I said or if it was confusing, feel free to reach out.
Perfect. And just so I'm clear, can you help people all over the nation or are you just limited to California?
I am licensed in California. I mean, I do have clients in other states. However, if it's specific state, I have colleagues nationwide and I can easily give a referral.
Oh, excellent. I love that. Please reach out to Jennifer. So thank you so much to our listener who joined us today. Really appreciate you being here. And remember, please share this episode with a friend. We need to share the education so we can share the wealth. Thanks so much. Bye for now.